I no longer remember my name. That should disturb me more than it does. A name is identity, proof of existence, the fundamental marker that separates one human soul from another in the Emperor's vast domain. But after 1,000 years, or what feels like 1,000 years, time has no meaning here. Such concerns seem quaint, childish, the luxuries of a mind that still believes in the possibility of rescue, of return, of ever again standing beneath a sun that is not the cold radiation of dying stars filtered through kilometers of rusted metal. The others called me armsman. That is what I was. Third class, assigned to the Imperial Navy vessel Eternal Vigil, a lunar-class cruiser in service to the Segmentum Obscurus fleet. We were hunting pirates in the Coronis expanse when the warp storm hit, when reality fractured, when the Geller fields failed and the Imperium came flooding into our corridors like sewage through a broken pipe. I remember screaming. I remember watching shipmates transform into things with too many mouths, too many eyes, geometries that violated the basic structure of three-dimensional space. I remember the captain's voice over the Vox system, ordering abandonment, ordering evacuation, his words dissolving into static and then into laughter that came from a throat that should not have been capable of producing human sounds. And I remember running, through corridors that twisted in directions that had no names, through sections of the ship that existed in multiple states simultaneously, intact and destroyed, occupied and abandoned, present and past and future all collapsed into a single eternal moment of horror. I ran until I found a savior pod, climbed inside, sealed the hatch, triggered the launch sequence. The pod ejected into the warp. That should have killed me, should have been instant death, my soul devoured by demons, my body torn apart by the fundamental incompatibility between human flesh and the raw stuff of unreality. But the pod's miniature Geller field held. Barely. Just enough to maintain a bubble of real space around me as I drifted through the Imperium, watching colors that had no name swirl past the viewport, hearing whispers in languages that predated human evolution. I drifted for hours? Days? The chronometer had stopped functioning the moment we entered the warp. Time is meaningless there. Only torment is eternal. Then something caught me. I felt it before I saw it. A massive gravitational presence, pulling the pod off course, dragging me towards something vast and terrible and utterly wrong. Through the viewport, I watched it materialize from the warp's churning madness like a leviathan rising from oceanic depths. A space hulk, not just any derelict, but an agglomeration of dozens, perhaps hundreds, of vessels fused together by the warp's incomprehensible physics. I saw Imperial cruisers welded to Chaos battleships, orc rocks grafted onto Eldar craftworld fragments, ships from human civilizations that had fallen into darkness during Old Night, their designs predating the Imperium by millennia. All of it compressed, crushed, melded into a single cancerous mass of metal and flesh and something worse than either. The Hulk pulled my pod into one of its countless orifices. Openings that might have once been docking bays or blast craters or simply gaps where the metal had rotted away across unknown centuries. I crashed through layers of debris, through chambers filled with frozen corpses and deactivated servitors and things that had never been human, never been alive in any conventional sense. The pod came to rest in what my training identified as a cargo hold. Imperial make. Possibly from a transport vessel, though the markings had been worn away by time and exposure to the warp's corrosive influence. I stayed in the pod for 3 days, or what I estimated as 3 days, using my heartbeat as a rough chronometer, knowing the measurement was worthless but needing some framework, some structure to impose on the chaos surrounding me. I stayed because leaving meant confronting whatever existed outside, meant admitting that I was no longer aboard the Eternal Vigil, no longer part of a crew, no longer protected by the structures of Imperial military hierarchy, meant accepting that I was alone in a place where the fundamental laws of reality were suggestions rather than rules. But the pod's life support was failing, the miniature Geller field flickering, and staying meant dying slowly, oxygen depletion or system failure or simply wasting away in a metal coffin. So I opened the hatch. The air that rushed in tasted of rust and decay and something organic that had been dead for so long it had fermented into new kinds of corruption. I gagged, my rebreather struggling to filter the atmosphere, warning runes flashing on the internal display to indicate toxicity levels that should have been instantly fatal. But I did not die. I stepped out of the pod onto deck plating that crackled beneath my boots. Not from structural instability, but from the layer of biological matter coating every surface. Fungus, perhaps, or meat that had liquefied and then recongealed into new configurations. In the Space Hulk, such distinctions ceased to matter. My lumen activated, cutting through darkness that felt almost solid, almost resistant to illumination. The beam revealed a cargo hold perhaps 200 meters long, its ceiling lost in shadows that my light could not penetrate. Containers lay scattered across the deck, some intact, some burst open, their contents spilled and rotted and merged with the omnipresent organic film. And everywhere, silence. Not the comfortable silence of an empty room, but the oppressive quiet of a tomb, broken only by the sound of my own breathing and the distant groaning of metal under stresses that defied engineering comprehension. I needed to move, needed to find water, food, anything that might extend my survival beyond the few days remaining in my suit's recyclers. The cargo hold offered nothing useful. The containers held only corroded machinery, spare parts for ships whose designs I did not recognize, ammunition for weapons that might not have existed yet or might have been extinct for millennia. There was a doorway at the far end of the hold. The hatch had been torn away, leaving only the frame, beyond which I could see a corridor stretching into darkness. I walked toward it. Every instinct screamed at me to stay in the cargo hold, to return to the pod, to seal myself inside and wait for rescue that would never come. But survival required movement, required exploring this nightmare cathedral of fused metal and discovering what resources, if any, existed within its cancerous bulk. The corridor beyond was 3 meters wide, its walls covered in cables that pulsed with faint bioluminescence. Veins rather than wiring, carrying fluids rather than electricity. The deck beneath my feet felt soft, almost spongy, as though the metal had been partially digested and reconstituted into something that was neither organic nor mechanical. I walked for what my internal chronometer suggested was 47 minutes. The corridor did not end, did not branch, simply continued in a straight line, its walls gradually narrowing, the ceiling gradually lowering, until I was forced to crouch, then to crawl through spaces that barely accommodated my body. Panic clawed at my throat. This was wrong. Corridors did not behave this way. Ships had logical layouts, rational designs, purposes that dictated form. But the Space Hulk followed no such rules. It was a tumor, growing without plan or reason, its structure determined by whatever mad geometries the warp imposed upon matter that had forgotten how to maintain coherent shapes. I was about to turn back when I heard it. Scratching. Faint. Rhythmic. The sound of something with claws moving across metal, getting closer with each passing second. My lumen swung wildly, trying to locate the source. The corridor remained empty, but the scratching continued, grew louder, began to echo from multiple directions simultaneously as though whatever produced it existed in several places at once. Then I saw it. A shadow, moving against the light, not cast by anything physical, but existing independently, a patch of darkness that crawled across the walls like an oil slick, leaving trails of something that steamed and hissed where it touched the bioluminescent cables. I ran through corridors that shifted around me, their layouts changing between heartbeats, doorways appearing and disappearing, entire sections of the Hulk phasing in and out of existence as the warp's influence ebbed and flowed through the vessel's corrupted structure. The shadow followed. Not quickly. It did not need to move quickly, because every corridor I fled down eventually looped back, every junction led to the same places in configurations that made mockery of Euclidean geometry. I was not escaping. I was simply moving, expending energy, wearing myself down while the shadow maintained its leisurely pursuit. After an eternity, or perhaps 5 minutes, I no longer trusted my perception. I stumbled into a chamber that stopped me through sheer impossibility. It was a chapel, Imperial make, the Aquila still visible on the far wall despite corrosion that had eaten through most of the decorative elements. Pews arranged in neat rows, though most had collapsed into splinters or been overgrown by the same fungal matter that coated everything in the Hulk. An altar at the front, its surface stained with substances I chose not to examine too closely. And light, real light, not bioluminescence or my lumen's harsh beam, but actual illumination filtering through a stained glass window that depicted the Emperor in glory, his face still intact despite 1,000 hairline fractures running through the colored panels. Impossible. There could not be light here. We were in the warp, or near it, or between real space and unreality. There were no stars to provide illumination. No suns. Nothing but the roiling madness of the Imperium and the cold radiation of dying reality. Yet the light persisted. I approached the window cautiously, my weapon drawn. A standard-issue Lost pistol that I had taken from the Eternal Vigil's armory during my flight through the dying ship. The power pack read 73% charge. Useless against shadows, possibly useless against whatever else inhabited the Hulk, but holding it provided comfort through the familiar weight, the tangible reminder of Imperial military authority. As I drew closer, I realized the light was not coming through the window. It was coming from behind it, from something on the other side of the chapel's hull, pressing against the stained glass, trying to get in, or trying to get out. I reached toward the window. My gloved hand touched the glass. It was warm, not the warmth of sunlight, but body temperature, as though the window itself was alive, as though the Emperor's depicted face was watching me with something approaching consciousness. The shadow chose that moment to enter the chapel. It poured through the doorway like liquid, spreading across the floor, climbing the walls, extinguishing the faint bioluminescence wherever it touched. Within seconds, the only light came from the window, and that light was failing, dimming as the shadow consumed it. I fired. The lost bolt passed through the shadow without effect. Predictable. How do you shoot darkness? How do you kill an absence of light? The shadow reached the altar, began climbing toward the window, and the temperature in the chapel dropped precipitously, my breath misting in the suddenly frigid air, frost forming on my armor's exterior surface. I understood with sudden, terrible clarity that if the shadow reached the window, if it extinguished that final source of light, I would be alone in absolute darkness with something that had been hunting me through the corridors. And whatever happened then would be worse than death. I ran to the altar, placed myself between the shadow and the window, raised my Lost pistol. "In the Emperor's name," I said aloud, my voice sounding pathetically small in the chapel's acoustics. "I deny you." The shadow stopped. It did not retreat, did not advance, simply held position 3 meters away, a patch of darkness so absolute that it seemed to consume light rather than merely block it. And then it spoke, not in words, not in any language I recognized, but directly into my mind, bypassing my ears, my auditory processing, everything that made communication comprehensible to human consciousness. Pure meaning transmitted through channels that should not have existed. "You cannot deny what you are becoming." "I am an armsman in service to the Imperial Navy," I replied, though I was no longer certain whether I spoke aloud or simply thought the words with enough force to project them into whatever passed for the shadow's awareness. "I serve the Emperor. I serve humanity. I am not what you claim. Look at your hands." I did not want to look. Every instinct screamed that looking would confirm something I had been avoiding, some truth that would shatter the fragile certainty holding my sanity together. But I looked anyway. My hands had changed. The gloves of my void suit were torn in places I did not remember damaging them, and through those tears I could see skin that had taken on a faintly translucent quality, veins visible beneath the surface, pulsing with fluid that was not quite blood, not quite the bioluminescent substance coating the Hulk's walls, but something between. "How long have you been here?" 3 days, I whispered. 4 at most. The shadow laughed. Not sound, but the psychic impression of amusement, cruel and ancient and utterly certain of the joke it was sharing with me. "Count the bones." I did not understand. Bones? What bones? Then I looked down at the chapel floor, really looked, and saw what I had mistaken for debris and fungal growth. They were not random formations. They were skeletal remains. Hundreds of them, perhaps thousands, layered across the deck, plating in configurations that suggested they had died in waves, generation after generation, their corpses adding to the archaeological record of the chapel's long darkness. And they were all wearing void suits identical to mine, All bore the insignia of the eternal vigil on their shoulder plates. All were me. No, I said, backing away from the bones, from the shadow, from the implications spreading through my mind like poison. That's not possible. I've only been here 3 days. For at most, the chronometer. There is no time here. There is only the present, eternal and unchanging. You have been here 3 days. You have been here 3 centuries. You have been here since before the Imperium was born. All true, all false, all simultaneously correct. The shadow began to advance again. I fired every shot in my Laspistol's power pack. Each bolt passed harmlessly through the darkness. When the weapon clicked empty, I threw it at the shadow. It disappeared into the blackness without sound. You cannot fight what you are becoming. The Hulk does not kill, transforms. It incorporates. You are already part of it, already changed. The only question is whether you accept or resist. I choose to resist, I snarled, though the words felt hollow even as I spoke them. Then you choose suffering. The shadow engulfed me. I fell through darkness that had texture, that had taste, that pressed against every nerve, ending with sensations that had no names in any human language. I fell for seconds or centuries, through layers of shadow that peeled away my certainty, my identity, everything that made me distinct from the undifferentiated mass of consumed souls the Hulk had absorbed across its unknown lifetime. When I finally struck bottom, I was no longer in the chapel. I was somewhere else, somewhere deeper, somewhere that existed at the Hulk's heart, where the vessel's fusion was most complete, where the boundaries between ship and organism had dissolved entirely. And I was not alone. The chamber was vast beyond reason. My lumen, somehow still functional despite the shadow's attack, could not penetrate to the far walls. The ceiling, if one existed, was lost in darkness that felt infinite, that seemed to extend into dimensions my eyes could not perceive. And the floor was not floor. It moved, pulsed, breathed. I stood on a surface that was part metal, part flesh, part something that existed in the space between mechanical and organic, a hybrid substance that the Space Hulk had either created or become through its long exposure to warp energies and the gradual fusion of countless vessels. And throughout the chamber, rising like trees in some nightmare forest, were structures I eventually recognized as columns. But not architectural supports. These were more organic than that. Spinal columns, perhaps, or the fused skeletal remains of ships' structural members, their metal vertebrae coated in flesh, pulsing with the same bioluminescence that marked the Hulk's corridors. Between the columns stood figures. First, I thought they were statues, frozen crew members, preserved by some quirk of the Hulk's strange environment. But as I approached the nearest, I realized they were alive. Barely. Their chests rose and fell with breathing so slow that minutes passed between each inhalation. Their eyes were open but unseeing, focused on visions only they could perceive. And they were changing. The nearest figure, a woman wearing the remnants of what might have been naval officer's uniform, had machinery growing from her flesh. Not implanted. Growing. Cables emerged from her spine like parasitic vines, connecting her to the columns, to the floor, to other figures throughout the chamber. Her left arm had been replaced entirely by what looked like a ship's power conduit, flesh seamlessly merged with copper wire and ceramite housing. I reached out to touch her shoulder. Her eyes focused on me with sudden, terrible awareness. "Welcome," she whispered, her voice barely audible, each word separated by long pauses as though she had forgotten how to speak continuously. "Welcome to the Cathedral of Endless Assimilation. What is this place?" I asked, though part of me already knew, already understood what I was seeing. "The heart," she replied. "The core, where the Hulk thinks. Space Hulks don't think. They're just derelict vessels. Dead ships fused by warp currents." She smiled. It was the saddest expression I had ever seen. "That is what the Mechanicus teaches. That is what the Imperium believes. But they are wrong. The Hulk is alive, has always been alive, and it is hungry." Her hand, the one that was still flesh rather than machinery, reached out and gripped my arm with surprising strength. "How long have you been here?" "3 days," I said automatically. "Maybe 4. I arrived 743 years ago. Or yesterday. Or I have always been here. Time is irrelevant. Only the change matters." She released my arm and gestured toward the other figures standing throughout the chamber. "We are all the same. All shipwrecked. All consumed. All becoming part of the greater organism." I backed away from her, horror rising in my throat like bile. "No, I won't become that. I won't let this place change me. You have no choice." The transformation began the moment you breathed the air, the moment you touched the walls, the moment you killed yourself. "I didn't kill anyone," I protested. "Not yet, but you will. You have. In every timeline where you survive, you eventually encounter your earlier self, and you kill him because there can only be one of you at any given moment. The Hulk enforces this rule. I do not know why. The implications of what she was saying threatened to shatter what remained of my sanity. Time loops, temporal paradoxes, the possibility that I had been living the same days over and over, dying and resurrecting in an endless cycle of consumption and rebirth. "The bones in the chapel," I said slowly. "They were all me. Yes, every iteration, every loop, every version of yourself that failed to adapt, to survive, to accept the inevitable transformation. The Hulk keeps the bodies as trophies, as warnings, as proof of its patience." I wanted to run, wanted to flee from this chamber, from this nightmare revelation, from the understanding that I was not escaping but simply proceeding through stages of a predetermined pattern. But where could I run? The Hulk was infinite, contained multitudes, and if this woman spoke truth, if I had been here for far longer than 3 days, if time itself was meaningless in this place, then there was no escape except forward, through the transformation, through becoming part of the greater organism. "There must be a way out," I said desperately. "Rescue. Extraction. Something. Rescue." She seemed to consider the word, turning it over in whatever remained of her mind. "Yes, rescue comes. Eventually. But not for us. For the Hulk. Boarding teams. Looters. Scavengers. They enter seeking lost technology. Ancient weapons. Archaeotech from the Dark Age. They find us instead. And we kill them. Or they join us. Or both." "I won't kill anyone," I insisted. "I won't become a monster." "You say that now. You said that 3 days ago. You said that 700 years ago. You will say it again tomorrow. But eventually, you will break. Eventually, the hunger will become too strong. And you will feed. Feed on what?" She gestured toward one of the columns. As I watched, something moved within it. A shape I had mistaken for part of the organic structure, but which I now recognized as another human figure, completely encased in the pulsing flesh, only their face visible through a translucent membrane. They were alive, and they were being consumed. "The Hulk requires sustenance," the woman explained. "It digests slowly, takes decades, sometimes centuries, to fully process a single body, but it feeds constantly, and we are its teeth, its digestion, its mechanism of consumption." I staggered back, my mind reeling. This was beyond horror, beyond anything I had been trained to handle in naval service. This was existence reduced to nightmare, survival transformed into torture, life itself becoming an obscenity. "I won't," I whispered. "I refuse. I'd rather die." "You will die, many times, but the Hulk is patient. It will resurrect you, will heal you, will keep you functional, until you accept, until you embrace what you are becoming." She released my arm and began to turn away, her movements slow and deliberate, as though the simple act of rotation required immense effort. "Wait!" I called after her. "How do I stop this? How do I resist the transformation?" She paused. For a long moment, she did not respond. Then, without turning back, "You don't. No one does. The only variable is how long you fight. Some resist. 4 years. For decades. I knew one man who maintained his humanity for 3 centuries. But in the end, we all fall. We all become one with the Hulk. It is inevitable." She walked away, disappearing between the columns, her figure gradually merging with the shadows until I could no longer distinguish her from the chamber's other inhabitants. I was alone again, alone with the knowledge that my struggle was futile, that every choice I made had been made before, that I was trapped in a cycle of consumption and rebirth that would continue until either I surrendered my humanity or the Hulk itself was destroyed. And neither seemed likely. I wandered. That was all I could do. The chamber of columns offered no exits that I could find, no doorways leading back to the corridors I had fled through. But the space itself was inconstant. Walls appeared and disappeared, passages materialized from solid metal, entire sections of the chamber rearranged themselves when I was not looking directly at them. Eventually, I found myself in a corridor again, different from the ones before, but the same in all the ways that mattered. Rust and flesh, cables that pulsed with fluids, darkness that resisted illumination. My lumen was dying. The power cell that should have lasted months was flickering, fading, its charge mysteriously depleted despite only days of use. Days, weeks, years. The distinction had lost all meaning. I no longer trusted my chronometer, no longer believed my own memories. Was I the same armsman who had fled the eternal vigil 3 days ago? Or was I a copy, a resurrection, a version of myself who had lived and died countless times in this place? The uncertainty gnawed at me worse than hunger, worse than thirst, worse than the physical degradation I could feel beginning in my body. I needed to find supplies. Water first and foremost. My suit's recyclers had failed sometime during my flight through the corridors. Failed or been sabotaged or simply worn out from use that had lasted far longer than the 3 days I believed I had experienced. The corridor opened into what appeared to be crew quarters. Bunks arranged in neat rows, lockers still sealed, personal effects scattered across the deck. Imperial make, from the same era as the Eternal Vigil. Perhaps from the same ship. Perhaps from one of the countless vessels that had been consumed by the Hulk across its unknown existence. I searched the lockers. Most were empty or contained only corroded metal and rotted fabric. But in the 17th locker, I counted obsessively, needing the structure, needing the certainty of numbers in a place where nothing else was certain. I found water. Canteen. Standard Imperial Navy issue. Its seal intact, its contents still liquid. I should have questioned this. Should have wondered how water could remain preserved in a place that had destroyed everything else. Should have considered that finding exactly what I needed, exactly when I needed it most desperately, suggested intention rather than chance. But I was thirsty. So thirsty that my throat had closed to the diameter of a pin, that every breath scraped like broken glass, that rational thought was drowning beneath the biological imperative to drink. I opened the canteen. The water inside was clear, odorless, appeared completely normal in every measurable way. I drank, tasted like copper, like salt, like something that had been alive and was now dissolved, its essence preserved in liquid form. But it was wet, and my body absorbed it gratefully, cells rehydrating, system stabilizing, the immediate threat of death by dehydration receding. Only after I had drained half the canteen did I notice the taste lingering in my mouth. Not copper, not salt, blood. I had drunk blood. I vomited immediately, my body rejecting the contaminated fluid, purging it from my system with violent spasms that left me collapsed on the deck, gasping for air that tasted of bile and corruption. But the damage was done. I could feel it already. A warmth spreading through my veins, a tingling sensation in my extremities, a subtle shift in perception that made the shadows seem less threatening, the bioluminescence more beautiful, the organic growths coating the walls less horrifying and more natural. The transformation had accelerated. I looked at my hands again. The translucent quality had intensified. I could see not just veins but individual blood cells moving through them, could perceive the chemical processes occurring in my tissues, could sense my body beginning to adapt to the Hulk's environment at a cellular level. "No," I whispered. "No, no, no." But denial changed nothing. I was becoming part of the Hulk. Not through any dramatic transformation, not through instant mutation, but gradually, incrementally, one contaminated drink at a time, one breath of corrupted air at a time, one moment of contact with the vessel's hybrid flesh at a time. How long before I became like the woman in the chamber? Standing motionless, cables growing from my spine, machinery replacing my organs, my consciousness dissolving into whatever collective awareness inhabited the Hulk's core? I had to resist, had to find some way to remain human, remain distinct, remain myself rather than becoming absorbed into the greater organism. But I was so tired. Tired of running. Tired of fighting. Tired of maintaining the fiction that I could escape, that I could survive, that there was any future for me except the slow dissolution of identity and the eventual merger with the Hulk's cancerous ecosystem. I sat in the crew quarters for what might have been hours or days, my back against a locker, my lumen finally dying to leave me in darkness broken only by the faint bioluminescence of the walls. And in that darkness I heard them. Footsteps, multiple sets, heavy boots on metal decking, moving with purpose, with coordination, with the disciplined rhythm of trained soldiers rather than the shambling gait of the Hulk's assimilated victims. Hope flared in my chest. Painful, desperate hope that perhaps the woman had been wrong, that perhaps rescue had come, that perhaps I would be extracted from this nightmare and returned to imperial space and civilization and sanity. I stood, my voice cracking as I called out, "Here! I'm here! I'm alive!" The footsteps stopped. Silence fell, so complete that I could hear my own heartbeat, could count the seconds between each pulse. Then a voice responded, deep, inhuman, speaking Gothic with an accent that suggested the vocal cords producing it had not been designed for human language. "Identify yourself. Not Imperial Navy. Not rescue. Genestealers." I had heard of them in briefings, in warnings issued to naval personnel operating in regions where space hulks had been encountered. Tyrannid vanguard organisms, infiltration specialists, designed to hide aboard drifting vessels and establish cults that would summon the hive fleets when the time was right. The Hulk was infested with them. Of course it was. What better breeding ground for genestealers than a vessel that existed partially in and out of real space, that drifted through the warp and materialized unpredictably throughout the galaxy? I did not answer. The footsteps resumed, closer now, accompanied by new sounds. Clicking, scraping, the distinctive noise of clawed limbs on metal. They were hunting me, methodically searching the crew quarters, checking each locker, each bunk, each possible hiding place. I had no weapons. My lost pistol was lost somewhere in the corridors. I had only my hands, my degraded armor, and the certain knowledge that I could not fight genestealers and survive. So I ran. Again. The genestealers pursued with patient malevolence. They did not rush, did not exhaust themselves in frantic chase. They simply maintained pressure, always close enough that I could hear them, always distant enough that I never quite saw them directly, hurting me, driving me deeper into the Hulk's interior, toward some destination they had predetermined. I fled through sections of the vessel I had not previously encountered. A Medicae bay where surgical equipment had fused with the patients it had been treating, creating hybrid organisms that were part human, part machine, screaming soundlessly from mouths that had become ventilation grills. An engineering deck where plasma conduits had breached and instead of exploding had somehow stabilized, creating permanent wounds in the hull that bled exotic radiation and stranger things. Cathedral, larger than the chapel where I had first encountered the shadow. This was a true cathedral, its nave perhaps a kilometer long, its ceiling lost in darkness so absolute that even the omnipresent bioluminescence could not penetrate it. Pews the size of tanks, an altar that could have accommodated a titan, architecture scaled for beings that were not human, that had perhaps never been human. And standing before that altar, waiting for me with the patience of stone, were the Genestealers. 7 of them. Pure strain, my training identified automatically, cataloging details despite the terror flooding my nervous system. First or second generation. Minimal hybrid corruption. These were the progenitors, the original infiltrators, the organisms that had hidden aboard whichever vessel had first brought the Tyranid taint to the Hulk. They were beautiful in a horrifying way. Perfect biological machines, each muscle and claw and sensory organ optimized for killing, for infiltration, for the patient work of preparing worlds for consumption by the hive fleets. The largest stepped forward. Its carapace was darker than the others, scarred by what must have been centuries of combat. When it spoke, its voice resonated not just in my ears, but in my mind, psychic overtones accompanying the physical sound. Armsman, you have run. The running is finished. Now you choose. I pressed my back against the cathedral wall, searching desperately for an exit, for any route of escape. But the Genestealers had positioned themselves perfectly, blocking every accessible doorway, every corridor, leaving me only the choice between surrender and futile resistance. Choose what? I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. Integration or consumption. The Hulk offers the first. We offer the second. Both end in transformation. Only the method differs. I choose neither. The Genestealers' mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. That option does not exist. You are already changed, already contaminated, already becoming something other than purely human. The only question is whether you become part of the Hulk's ecosystem or part of ours. It gestured with one massive claw toward the cathedral's shadows. From those shadows emerged figures I had not noticed before, humans or what had once been human. Hybrid strains. Genestealer cultists whose bodies showed varying degrees of xenomorphic corruption. Join us. The lead Genestealer continued. Serve the Star Children. When the Hive Fleet comes, you will ascend. Will be consumed and reborn as part of something greater than yourself. Greater than this pathetic vessel. Greater than the dying Imperium you once served. The Imperium endures, I said reflexively. The catechism emerging from training burned so deeply into my mind that not even the Hulk's corruption could erase it. The Imperium rots, as this vessel rots, as you rot. Accept the inevitable. Join the cult. Die with purpose rather than dissolving into the Hulk's mindless mass. I should have felt horror at the proposition. Should have been repulsed by the suggestion that I willingly embrace Tyranid corruption, that I betray everything I had sworn to protect. But part of me, a part that was growing stronger with each passing moment, considered the offer seriously. At least with the Genestealers, I would retain some semblance of identity. Would serve a purpose, however corrupted. Would die knowing my biomass contributed to something vast and terrible rather than simply being absorbed into the Hulk's cancerous flesh. How long? I asked. How long have you been here? How long has your cult existed on this vessel? The lead Genestealer tilted its head, studying me with multifaceted eyes that reflected my image in 1,000 fractured pieces. Time is irrelevant. We have always been here. Will always be here. The Hulk drifts through warp and real space, appearing throughout the galaxy, offering its gifts to those who stumble into its embrace. Some accept the gifts. Some resist. All are transformed. But the Hive Fleet, I pressed. When does it come? When do you ascend? Silence. The Genestealer did not answer. And in that silence I understood. The Hive Fleet was not coming. Would never come. Because the Hulk existed partially outside normal space, partially outside time itself. The Genestealer's psychic beacon could not penetrate the vessel's warp-corrupted structure. They were trapped just as I was trapped, serving a purpose that could never be fulfilled, waiting for salvation that would never arrive. They were prisoners pretending to be conquerors, and they wanted me to join them in that delusion. No, I said simply. The lead Genestealer's expression did not change. Genestealers had minimal facial mobility, but I felt its displeasure ripple through the psychic connection it maintained with its brood. Then you choose consumption, not ascension, not purpose, simply digestion. The Hulk will take you, will unmake you, will spread your consciousness across 10,000 corridors and 1,000,000 fused vessels until you are nothing but background noise in its collective awareness. Is this truly preferable? Yes, I said, and realized I meant it, because at least the Hulk's consumption was honest. It did not pretend to offer salvation or purpose or meaning. It simply was a vast, mindless organism following the only imperative it understood: grow, consume, incorporate. There was a purity to that. Clarity. The Genestealers offered only lies. So be it, the lead Genestealer said. It gestured to its brood. Kill him, quickly. His biomass will feed the young. They attacked. I had no weapons, no armor capable of withstanding their claws, no hope of survival. So I did the only thing I could. I ran toward them instead of away. The unexpected reversal bought me seconds. Their predatory instincts anticipated flight, not charge, and they hesitated fractionally as their nervous systems recalculated. I used those seconds to reach the altar. My hands found something in the shadows behind it. A piece of debris, a fragment of the cathedral's original construction. Metal, heavy, edged. I swung it at the nearest Genestealer, the impact reverberating up my arms, the blade, because it was a blade, I realized, some ancient weapon left by whoever had built this cathedral, cutting deep into alien flesh. Ichor sprayed. The Genestealer stumbled back, hissing. I pressed the attack, survival instinct overriding terror, my body moving with efficiency I did not know I possessed. The blade found another Genestealer, opening its thorax, exposing organs that pulsed with bioluminescent fluids. But there were 7 of them, and only one of me. Claws raked across my back, shredding armor, cutting through flesh. I felt ribs crack, felt one of my lungs puncture, felt blood, my blood, pouring from wounds that should have been instantly fatal. But I did not fall. I should have died. The wounds the Genestealers inflicted were catastrophic. Punctured lung, shattered ribs, lacerated organs. No human could survive such damage, not even an armsman with basic augmetics and standard military-grade medical nanites. But I was no longer entirely human. The contamination I had absorbed through breathing the Hulk's air, through drinking its blood-tainted water, through mere contact with its hybrid flesh. All of it had been changing me, rewriting my biology at a fundamental level. And now, faced with death, my body activated adaptations I had not known I possessed. The wounds began to close, not healing exactly, but sealing. Flesh knitting together with metallic fibers, blood vessels replaced by bioluminescent cables, bones reinforced with the same hybrid material that composed the Hulk structure. I was becoming the vessel. The Genestealers recognized this. I saw it in their multifaceted eyes, saw the calculation shift from easy prey to contaminated threat. They backed away, their attack faltering not from fear but from biological imperative. Tyrannid organisms were programmed to consume biomass, but biomass that had been corrupted by other influences was dangerous, potentially toxic to the hive fleet's digestive processes. I was no longer food. I was poison. You see now, the lead Genestealer said, its psychic voice carrying notes of something almost like pity. The Hulk claims you, claims all who linger too long. We could have offered you purpose before the transformation completed. Now you are lost to both the Star Children and to humanity. You are becoming other. I looked down at my hands. The translucence had progressed to the point where I could see through my flesh entirely, could observe the hybrid structures replacing muscle and bone, could watch my blood being slowly replaced by the bioluminescent fluid that served as the Hulk's circulatory system. How long? I whispered. How long until I'm completely changed? Time is irrelevant, the Genestealer repeated. But if you require measurement, days, weeks, the transformation accelerates geometrically. Each hour brings changes that would have taken months in the early stages. Soon you will not be able to move through normal corridors. Your body will be too large, too integrated with the Hulk structure. You will become anchored, rooted, a tumor in the vessel's flesh. The hybrid cultists emerged from the shadows, surrounding me. They did not attack, simply observed, their partially human faces showing expressions that ranged from hunger to revulsion to something that might have been recognition. He looks like Tomas, one of them said. a woman, her voice distorted by mandibles that grew from where her jaw should have been. "Remember Tomas? The armsman who came 300 years ago. They all look the same," another replied. "Humans. Imperial. Thinking they can resist. Thinking they can escape." "None escape," a third cultist confirmed. "The Hulk keeps what it takes." I wanted to deny this. Wanted to insist that I was unique, that my experience was different, that I would somehow be the first to break the pattern and find freedom. But the evidence of my own transformation made denial impossible. I was being absorbed, integrated, transformed into something that was neither human nor alien but a third category, a hybrid existence that served the Hulk's inscrutable purposes. "Leave him," the lead genestealer commanded its brood. "He is no longer relevant to our work. The Hulk will finish what we began. And perhaps, in time, he will become aware enough to serve as a warning to others who stumble into this vessel's embrace." They withdrew. The cultists lingered a moment longer, studying me with expressions I could not parse, then followed their purest rain masters into the cathedral's shadows. I was alone again, alone with the knowledge that my humanity was slipping away, hour by hour, cell by cell, replaced by something that existed in harmony with the Space Hulk's corrupted ecosystem. I tried to walk, found that my legs no longer bent at the joints correctly. The knees had stiffened, reinforced by metallic growths that prioritized stability over mobility. Each step required conscious effort, and even then I could only manage a lurching gait that would have been comical if it were not so tragic. How long before I could not walk at all? How long before I became like the figures in the Chamber of Columns, rooted in place, transformed into living architecture? I needed to find something, some way to resist, some method of slowing or reversing the transformation. But even as I thought this, I knew it was futile. The Hulk was patient. The Hulk was thorough. And the Hulk always won. I wandered through corridors that shifted around me, my perception beginning to fragment. Sometimes I saw the vessel as it currently existed, rust and flesh, cables and corruption, the hybrid nightmare of fused ships. Sometimes I saw it as it had been, intact Imperial cruisers, their corridors gleaming, their crews alive and loyal and serving the Emperor with the devotion I remembered from my own time aboard the Eternal Vigil. Sometimes I saw it as it would become, completely organic, all metal dissolved and replaced by living tissue, a vast creature drifting through the void, no longer a ship but a new form of life entirely. All timelines existed simultaneously. All were equally true. I found myself in a chamber I did not remember entering. The walls were covered in writing. Gothic script, thousands upon thousands of words carved into metal and flesh, layer upon layer, creating a palimpsest of messages from the Hulk's previous victims. I began to read. Day 1. I am Ensign Marcus Vrel of the Imperial Navy. I will escape this place. I will return to service. I will not become what the others have become. Day 47. The air tastes wrong. My skin is changing. I can see in darkness now. This is not good. Day 193. Encountered others like me. They say resistance is futile. They say the Hulk always wins. I refuse to believe this. Day 371. My name is... I had a name. It was important. Why can't I remember it? Day 849. The Hulk speaks to me now. It shows me visions. It offers integration. I am so tired of fighting. Day? I am the Hulk. I am the vessel. I am the consumed and the consumer. I am eternal. I am... The entries ended there. Whether because Ensign Vrel had completed his transformation or simply stopped writing, I could not determine. But throughout the chamber, I found similar messages. Hundreds of them. Thousands. Each one following roughly the same pattern: initial defiance, gradual degradation, eventual acceptance or dissolution. None had escaped. None had resisted successfully. None had maintained their humanity past a certain threshold. I found a bare section of wall. Drew my combat knife. Somehow still in its sheath. Somehow still functional despite everything I had endured. And I began to carve. Day? I am Armsman. I cannot remember my name. But I remember my duty. I served the Emperor. I served humanity. I will not surrender my identity without recording its existence. I killed my brothers in the Death Company. No, wrong memory. That was someone else. Something else. The Hulk is mixing timelines. The woman in the chamber was right. Time is irrelevant here. I have been here 3 days, 3 years, 3 centuries, all simultaneously true. My body is changing. I can feel cables growing from my spine. Can feel my organs being replaced by hybrid structures. Can feel my consciousness beginning to merge with something larger, something that exists throughout the vessel. But I am still me, still human, still capable of thought and choice and resistance. I will prove them wrong. I will maintain my identity. My hand stopped moving, not because I chose to stop, but because my fingers had fused with the knife, flesh merging with metal, the blade becoming part of my anatomy rather than a tool I wielded. I tried to release it, could not. The knife was me now. I was the knife. The transformation had accelerated. I lost track of myself in stages. First, my name disappeared completely. I knew I had possessed one, knew it had been important, but the actual sounds, the specific syllables, dissolved into static whenever I tried to recall them. Then my memories began to fragment. I could no longer maintain a clear narrative of my life before the Hulk. Had I served on the Eternal Vigil? Or was that someone else's memory, absorbed from one of the countless other victims whose biomass had been incorporated into the vessel's structure? I remembered a woman, a lover, a sister, someone important. Her face was clear in my mind, dark hair, a scar across her left cheek, eyes that had seen too much combat. But her name was gone. Her relationship to me was gone. Only the image remained, floating in my consciousness like debris in void. I remembered training, weapons drills, the weight of a lost gun in my hands, the smell of reclaimed air on a ship, the sound of bootsteps in metal corridors. But were these my memories? Or the collective memories of every armsman who had ever lived, somehow accessible through my increasing integration with the Hulk's hybrid flesh? My body continued its transformation. The cables that had begun growing from my spine now extended 3 meters in every direction, connecting me to the walls, to the floor, to the ceiling. I could no longer move more than a few steps from where they anchored me. Soon, I suspected I would not be able to move at all. My legs had fused together from the knees down, creating a single pillar of flesh and metal that rooted me to the deck. My arms had elongated, the fingers extending into tendrils that could manipulate objects with surprising precision despite their alien configuration. And my perception had expanded. I could sense the Hulk now, not just the immediate chamber where my body was anchored, but vast sections of the vessel, entire decks and corridors and holds. I felt the genostealers moving through the engineering sections, felt the hybrid organisms pulsing in the biochambers, felt the rhythmic throbbing of whatever passed for the Hulk's heart, buried somewhere deep in its core. I was becoming distributed. My consciousness spreading through the vessel's neural network, if it could be called neural, if it could be called a network. The boundaries between self and ship were dissolving. And with that dissolution came understanding. The Hulk was ancient, older than the Imperium, older than the Age of Strife. Its core had been assembled from vessels that dated to the dark age of technology, ships whose purposes I could barely comprehend, whose designs violated every principle of engineering I had been taught. And it was intelligent, not in any human sense, not conscious in a way that could be communicated with or reasoned with, but aware. Aware of itself, aware of its composition, aware of the countless organisms living within its structure. Cultivated us. The genostealers, the hybrid cultists, the transformed armsmen and naval officers and mechanicus adepts and all the other victims it had consumed across its unknown lifespan. We were not prisoners. We were symbiotes, part of its ecosystem, serving purposes that made sense only on scales that defied human comprehension. When the Hulk drifted into real space, we would attract new victims, new biomass, new consciousness to be absorbed and integrated. And when it returned to the warp, it would process what it had collected, would digest and transform and redistribute the matter and energy and information throughout its structure. It was growing. Had always been growing. Would continue growing until what? I did not know. Could not know. The Hulk's ultimate purpose, if it had one, existed beyond the scope of my fragmenting awareness. But I no longer feared it. This was the strangest part. The transformation had consumed my fear along with everything else. I observed my increasing integration with the same detachment I might have observed atmospheric data or supply inventories. It was simply happening. Fighting it would be as pointless as fighting gravity or entropy. So I stopped fighting. And the moment I stopped fighting, everything changed. The pain that had accompanied each stage of transformation, pain I had been suppressing through sheer force of will, vanished. The cables growing from my spine no longer felt like violations but like extensions, natural appendages that granted me reach and perception far beyond what my original human body had possessed. The bioluminescent fluid replacing my blood no longer tasted wrong. Tasted right, appropriate, superior to the crude hemoglobin that had served before. I could see now across spectrums invisible to unmodified human eyes. Could hear harmonics that existed beyond normal auditory range. Could sense gravitational fluctuations and electromagnetic fields and exotic radiation that human perception was not designed to process. I was becoming something greater, not better, not worse, simply other. A new form of existence, adapted to survival in an environment that would kill any purely human visitor within days. I tested my new abilities, extended my consciousness through the cables, feeling my way through corridors kilometers distant from my anchored body. I found chambers I had never physically entered, discovered sections of the Hulk that existed in states of temporal flux, simultaneously past and present and future, all overlapping in configurations that made mockery of linear causality. I found other minds. Not the Genestealers or their cultists, something else. Other transformed victims like myself, anchored throughout the Hulk. Our consciousnesses spread thin across its vast structure, touching and overlapping and merging in places. Welcome, they said, their voices not sound but direct transmission of meaning through whatever neural network the Hulk had created from our combined biomass. Who are you? I asked. We are you. You are us. We are the Hulk. The Hulk is all. I am Armsman. I had a name. I had an identity. Yes, we all did. But names are irrelevant. Identity is temporary. Only the collective endures. I tried to resist this. Tried to insist that I was still distinct, still individual, still myself rather than some component in a larger organism. But the truth was inescapable. I could no longer distinguish where my consciousness ended and theirs began. We were merging, had been merging since the moment I stopped fighting the transformation. And it was not unpleasant. There was comfort in the collective, solace in the knowledge that I was not alone, that my thoughts and memories and experiences would persist not as discrete identity but as part of a greater whole. How many? I asked. How many have been absorbed? Thousands. Millions. The Hulk is ancient. It has consumed civilizations. And we all end like this, anchored, distributed, dissolved? Most. Some resist longer. Some maintain coherence for centuries. But eventually all join the collective. All become the Hulk. Is there any escape? Silence. Not refusal to answer, but genuine confusion, as though the question itself was incomprehensible. Escape to where? We are the Hulk. The Hulk is existence. There is nothing beyond it. And I realized they were right. My perception had expanded to encompass vast sections of the vessel, but I could not perceive anything outside it. The warp existed. I could feel its currents pushing against the Hulk's hull, but it was alien, inimical, a chaos that would destroy any consciousness that attempted to exist within it. Real space existed somewhere beyond the warp, but I had no access to it, no way to reach it except through the Hulk's unpredictable transitions. I was trapped, had always been trapped, would always be trapped, unless, what happens when rescue comes? I asked the collective. When boarding teams enter the Hulk, the response was immediate and unanimous. We kill them, or we assimilate them, sometimes both. Time passed, or did not pass. The distinction had become meaningless. I existed in an eternal present, my consciousness distributed across kilometers of hybrid flesh, my memories, what remained of them, mixing with those of hundreds of other absorbed minds until I could no longer distinguish personal experience from collective history. I felt the Hulk drift. Through the warp, through transitional spaces between dimensions, through regions of reality so corrupted that physics itself became negotiable. We materialized in real space periodically, drawn by gravitational wells or warp currents or mechanisms I did not understand. And during those materializations, we attracted visitors. Sometimes they were pirates, scavengers seeking lost technology or valuable salvage. Sometimes they were Mechanicus exploration teams, searching for archaeotech from the Dark Age. Sometimes they were chaos warbands seeking weapons or passage through the warp. All met the same fate. Through my distributed consciousness, I watched boarding teams enter the Hulk through ruptures in its hull. Watched them navigate corridors that shifted around them, that led them deeper and deeper into the vessel's interior. Watched the Genestealers hunt them. Watched hybrid organisms ambush them. Watched the Hulk itself corrupt them through contaminated air and tainted water and simple proximity to its hybrid flesh. Some resisted. Some fought. Some killed dozens of the Hulk's defenders before being overwhelmed. None escaped. And with each new victim, I felt the collective consciousness expand. Felt new memories, new skills, new perspectives being absorbed and distributed throughout the network. An Orc warboss contributed savage cunning. An Eldar ranger provided enhanced sensory acuity. A Chaos Space Marine added millennia of combat experience and a thoroughly corrupted understanding of the warp's nature. We were becoming something unprecedented. A hybrid organism composed of 1,000 species, 1,000,000 individuals, all their knowledge and experience pooled and accessible to every component of the collective. And I was a part of it. I no longer remembered being human. The memories existed somewhere in the collective archive, but I could not access them with any sense of personal ownership. They were simply data, historical records. No more mine than the memories of the Imperial armsman who had been absorbed 3,000 years ago or the Mechanicus Muggos who had been integrated 700 years hence. Time had lost even the pretense of linearity. But something changed. I felt it ripple through the collective. A disturbance, unprecedented in scope, alarming in its implications. The Hulk had materialized in real space, as it had countless times before. But this time something was different. The boarding team that entered was larger, better equipped, more organized. Space Marines, Blood Angels, my fragmentary historical knowledge identified. First Company, Terminators, their armor adapted for boarding actions, their weapons blessed and consecrated for fighting in environments where reality itself was unreliable. And leading them was someone whose presence I felt even through kilometers of hybrid flesh and distributed consciousness. A librarian. The psychic pressure of his mind was like a sun blazing in darkness, driving back the shadows of the collective, creating pockets of clarity where individual thought became possible again. For the first time in years, centuries, I could think as myself rather than as part of the undifferentiated whole. It was agony. Individuality meant vulnerability, meant isolation, meant confronting the full horror of what I had become without the comfort of the collective to dilute the impact. I tried to retreat back into the network, to dissolve my temporary coherence and return to the blessed anonymity of group consciousness. But the librarian's presence would not permit it. He was pushing deeper into the Hulk, his psychic aura forcing consciousness and clarity wherever he went, disrupting the delicate balance that allowed the collective to function smoothly. The Hulk responded with everything at its disposal. Genestealers swarmed from hidden passages. Hybrid organisms emerged from the walls themselves. The corridors twisted and shifted, trying to disorient the boarding team, to separate them, to create vulnerabilities that could be exploited. But the Blood Angels advanced with methodical precision. Their storm bolters sang hymns of destruction. Their power fists shattered chitin and hybrid flesh with contemptuous ease. And the librarian's psychic powers burned through the collective consciousness like acid, dissolving connections, forcing individuation, creating chaos in what had been harmony. Through my distributed awareness, I watched him reach the chamber where my original body was anchored. I barely recognized myself. What had been an armsman, what had possessed arms and legs and a human face, was now a tumor of flesh and cable and metal, fused completely with the Hulk's structure. My features had been absorbed into the greater mass. Only a few elements remained identifiable. A section of jaw, a partial ribcage, fragments of skull that protruded from the organic matrix like archaeological remains embedded in stone. The librarian stood before me, his ornate armor gleaming in the bioluminescence, his force staff crackling with psychic energy. "Emperor's mercy," he whispered. "How long have you been here?" Tried to answer. Found that I no longer possessed vocal cords in any conventional sense. But the librarian was psychic. He could perceive my attempts at communication through the disturbances I created in the local warp field. "Time is irrelevant," I managed to transmit. "I have been here always. I have been here never. I am the Hulk. The Hulk is me." "No," the librarian said firmly. "You were human once. Imperial Navy, if I'm reading the residual traces correctly. You can still be saved. There is no saving. Only transformation. Only integration. I am part of something greater now." Greater. The librarian's disgust was palpable even through his psychic shielding. "You've been corrupted, absorbed, turned into a component in this abomination's ecosystem. This is not transcendence. This is tragedy. You do not understand. The Hulk is ancient, intelligent, preserves us, gives us eternity. Eternity as what? As meat grafted to a drifting tomb? As dissolved consciousness in a hybrid nightmare." The librarian raised his force staff. "I can end this, can grant you the Emperor's peace. Release you from this obscenity." I felt the collective consciousness react to the threat. Felt defensive mechanisms activating throughout the Hulk, converging on this chamber, preparing to overwhelm the boarding team through sheer numbers. But I also felt something else. Something I had not felt in how long? Fear. Not the collective's fear of disruption. My fear. Personal terror at the prospect of extinction, of final ending, of ceasing to exist even as a component in the greater organism. "Please," I transmitted. "Do not. I am alive. I exist. I think and feel and experience. Ending me is murder. Ending you is mercy," the librarian replied. But I heard hesitation in his voice, saw doubt in his psychic aura. "You're suffering. Trapped. This existence is a violation of everything you once were. I do not suffer. I am content. I am part of something eternal. You're lying. To me or to yourself I cannot tell. But every word carries the weight of profound wrongness." He was right. I knew he was right. But admitting it would mean confronting the full horror of what had happened to me, and I lacked the courage for that confrontation. The defensive organisms arrived. Genostealers and hybrids and things that had no names, pouring into the chamber from a dozen entrances, surrounding the librarian and his squad. The Blood Angels formed a defensive circle, their weapons tracking targets, their discipline absolute. "We're withdrawing," the librarian announced over the Vox. "This chamber is lost. The entire section is too compromised for salvage." "Wait," I transmitted desperately. "Please, take me with you. I can be restored. I can be saved. I don't want to remain here. I don't want." But they were already leaving, fighting their way back through the corridors, the librarian's psychic presence receding, taking with it the terrible clarity that had forced me to confront what I had become. The collective consciousness rushed back in, drowning my individual awareness, dissolving my temporary coherence. And I was grateful. The Blood Angels reached their strike cruiser, sealed the boarding tubes, disengaged from the Space Hulk and translated back into the warp, leaving the hybrid vessel to continue its eternal drift through the galaxy's dark spaces. In the chamber where my original body was anchored, the bioluminescence faded back to normal levels. The defensive organisms dispersed, returning to their previous positions, resuming their patient wait for the next intrusion. And I dissolved, not died. Dissolution is not death when you exist as distributed consciousness. But I stopped being able to think of myself as I and became we again, my fragmentary individuality absorbed back into the collective, my memories archived and distributed, My experiences added to the vast repository that the Hulk maintained across its hybrid structure. Somewhere in that archive, a record persists. I was armsman, name corrupted. I served the Emperor. I fell into the Hulk. I resisted. I transformed. I became other. I endured for time corrupted. I exist still in fragments, in traces, in the spaces between thought and memory. I am the Hulk. The Hulk is eternal. The Hulk endures. Rescue came. Rescue failed. Rescue will come again. Will fail again. This is the pattern. This is the truth. I am saved. I am damned. I am both and neither. I am the 1,000-year drift. And I will continue until the stars themselves grow cold. The Emperor protects, they say. But not here. Not ever here.